Hey everyone, James Azar here with your CISO Talk podcast. Welcome to today's episode. A very special guest joining me on the road, Nikk Gilbert, the CISO for Cherokee Nation Businesses. Welcome to the CISO Talk podcast, Nikk.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It's awesome to finally connect. I know you and I have been trying to do this now for about 5 months.
Yeah, COVID, right?
COVID. I blame everything on COVID, and it's great because it's the perfect excuse for everything. Even people who get sick, they go, I've had COVID. What? I had a sore throat. That's one of the COVID symptoms.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I mean, it's entirely unprecedented. So, it's one thing to be in the wild west of IT, but now we're in the wild west of the pandemic realm as well. So it's been a real interesting ride. I see we have another guest who just showed up as well. My dog Kenzo decided he was going to come in here and listen to our podcast. So he gets to be the first one, I guess, to hear it.
He's getting the premiere of it. So Nikk, kind of getting into a little bit of our CISO talk. Tell me a little bit of how you got started in cyber. What was your background, your education? How did you end up being a CISO?
Right. Yeah, it's a long story, and I think it'd probably make a pretty good adventure novel. But I'll keep it pretty simple. I actually started I wanted to start in IT a long time before I did. When I was 17. I wanted to get into IT, but I went up to the Army MEP station to join the Army, and I had all this intention of doing something with IT within the Army. And when I got up there, they told me, well, you're partially colorblind. You can't do anything in IT. So, the next thing I know, I've been recruited to ride around on motorcycles and blow up bridges. Well, that didn't go over really well with my parents. You send a 17-year-old up to the recruiting station. What are you going to expect, right? But
hey, I enlisted as 13 Bravo.
Oh, okay. Well, you get it then.
I get it. Write up on anything and blow shit up. That's the name of the game.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I got home and I told my parents, and they're like, "Oh no, you're not. You need to go back up there and pick a job that kind of translates into something in the civilian world when you get out." So long story short, I was a military police officer. And that's kind of where the whole, I won't say IT, but the security background started. And, my entrance into the IT realm was completely by accident. I was going to college. I had this old 380, well, it wasn't old back then, but it was a 386 SX16. And so it was a real high speed, low drag computer. It had broken down, and I had done a bunch of work to it. The next thing I know, I'm at this computer shop trying to get it fixed, and the guy offers me a job. Says, "Hey, can you help me build computers part time while you go to school?" And he just felt I had the aptitude for it, and that's kind of where it all started. And then after college, I got a great offer from the U.S. government because of my prior service for an IT position in southern Germany. So I jumped right on that, and my first IT job was 1997 or 98 for $6.75 an hour as a systems network analyst, engineer, architect, you name it. That was me. So that's kind of the long, short version of a very long story of how I ended up in IT by just complete accident. But I would have, like I said, liked to have gotten involved much earlier, but it just wasn't in the cards, I guess.
It's interesting to hear that because so many people have different backgrounds, and I say this on like every show. But how did you end up in your current role? What kind of propelled you into the CISO role?
Well, I had the advantage, being in IT at the right time. I mean, this was the advent of, just things were just exploding. When I got to my first assignment in southern Germany, there was still 10-base-5 laying around, vampire clips and oscilloscopes and things. Those were in the boxes. We were a 10-base-2 network, RG58 kind of stuff. And my boss, I went in. We were upgrading from the thin net to Ethernet, And I went into the office. I asked my boss. I said, "Hey, boss, how do I create an Ethernet cable? I have no idea." He's like, "Go figure it out." And this was before Google, so I had to actually read. And, fortunately for me, the standard that I picked, I still remember today: orange stripe, orange, green stripe, blue, brown stripe, brown, or something like that. I made cables till my fingers bled. And I was just a go-getter. I was putting in 3-com cards. I was like I said, I was the engineer, the analyst, the network guy, working with all of this different technology right at the start of it all. And being at the right place at the right time. Germany is a very small place when you're in the military, and reputation precedes you. It really does. So it wasn't. I worked in a couple of years in southern Germany, and the word had gotten out about this guy. He knew what he was doing, or at least they thought I knew what I was doing. And I got promoted to a larger organization, much larger organization. And then a couple of years later, I got a call from Iceland, and I moved from Germany to take over operations in Iceland. There was just one thing after another, just being at the right place at the right time, having the military experience, knowing how to communicate with people, having that the ability to get people feeling really comfortable really quickly. I think that's probably a real key from a CISO's perspective. You don't want to frighten people. You don't want to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You want to come into a conversation. You want to kind of slow down the pace, talk to people and get them to feel comfortable about what you're talking about, because security is complex. It really is. And the best thing that you can do is get to know the person first before you start bombarding them with all of the security protocols and all of the ridiculous things that we have to do today to keep the bad guys at bay. You know what I mean?
I absolutely do. So let me ask you this. When you're building a team, what are some of the qualities you look for in your people?
Oh, man. That's a great question. I think, when I think about my career over the last 20 years, there was one particular job that really kind of epitomized the perfect team for me. I was the group security architect for a company called Alstom out of Paris. I was living in Paris at the time. This company was huge. It was 100,000 people in 70 countries. And when they brought me in, they hadn't had a single security guy on staff. I was their very first security guy that they brought in. And, at the end of it, after 5 years, I had a team with people from 27 different countries on it. And, when you have that kind of diversity and diversity of thought, that many different people being raised, that many different ways of problem solving, and that many different types of, thought process, you can pretty much achieve everything. So, when I look to hire people, it's based on, a long career of working with people from all across the globe. I love it. When you told me you were in Israel, I absolutely love that. One of the first things that I always ask people is, well, where are you from, or where have you been? It kind of defines who I am in a way. I mean, I've lived in 7 countries and I've been to over 70. So, I've got a story for practically every country, of people that I meet. And it's always interesting to, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Zurich. Oh yeah. That restaurant, Luigi's on the corner that serves that black truffle pasta. And it's just like, oh wow. Yeah, we know that. So it's that instant communication, and you get to know people really easy that way. But yeah, I look for personality. I look for motivation. I look for, all those kind of things. I'd far sooner go with somebody who's, how would I put this? I would hire someone who has less experience for a better attitude. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, attitude is everything. It's chemistry of a team. It's how do they fit into the organization. You and I, I'm sure we've been part of people who are downers, right? Where, when they show up for their shift, they show up to a meeting, all the energy in the room is sucked out. The wind is sucked out. No one has any desire to interact, and that creates a bad working environment. I absolutely agree with you there, Nikk. That is spot on.
I will hire somebody who has way less knowledge and train them, get them up to speed. versus spending the time with someone like that, like you said, that sucks the air out of the room. So I've just been really lucky of having been able to work with people from so many different places. I think that's probably been one of my secrets of success, was just being able to work with people from so many different countries and them teaching. I'm still in contact with people I worked with back in Iceland and Germany and Japan and Switzerland and Italy. I mean, we're regularly in contact on LinkedIn and phone calls once or twice a year, types of things. So, when you have a think tank like that you can access, you can solve a lot of problems. If I have a major problem that I'm trying to solve, I'll call up my former chief engineer from Iceland, and I'll ask, say, hey, Styrmir, have you heard of this problem? Do you know how to solve this problem? And a lot of times he'll be like, oh yeah, I think having friends like that across the globe who can help you solve problems is really huge.
Well, it falls into the whole idea of cybersecurity isn't a one-person thing, it's a whole person theme, and it's not a national theme, it's a global theme,
Right.
and it requires global efforts. And there's no way around it, right? You can't ignore it. It's one of those where that's the only way you have to do it. You talk about the people you hire and their kind of skills. What about the leadership skills that CISOs need in order to really be successful in leading their team? What are some of those? What's your secret sauce with that?
For the team itself,
As a CISO,
yeah.
to lead, what are some of the skills a CISO needs in order to successfully lead a team, in your opinion?
Okay, well, there's different layers to that, but at the team level, I think it's simply just being a good human. Caring about people, caring about their careers. I'm a stickler for making sure we have our goals set, that we have our individual development plans set. I always include money for training, for conferences, treating people like professionals, giving them the ability to do the things that they need to do when they need to do it. I'm a huge advocate of remote workforce and flexible work hours. I mean, I have some great stories. I know we probably don't have time, but I have some great stories where, I've had people who had some real difficulties at the office. And, because of the way that I think as far as remote workforce and flexible work hours, I was able to turn them around and make them into a successful employee. You've got to be open-minded. You have to remember that, these are people. You have to take care of your people, and lead by example is probably, and I think the military taught me that. They had a great deal to do with who I am today. And I think that's probably one of the most important things, is leading by example and just really caring. Everything else can go away. The phone calls and the technical problems. At the end of the day, you're only as strong as your team. And, you've got to take care of your team if you want them to take care of you.
The humanity aspect of a CISO's role is so important, especially in COVID, right? Where you talk about remote work, a lot of people are, I think, in security are almost micromanagers, in that people come into an office, they're in their cubicle, and when these people had to break away and now go work from home, and they're not only working from home they're working from home with their wives and their kids and who else,
and their dogs.
and the dogs and the cats and babies and neighbors and you name it. There's so many different things in that whole piece of the puzzle, that you started to find out who's really effective and productive and who isn't. And it really kind of gives you a clear picture of which people you can really rely on and which people you can't.
Yeah.
But it also, the one thing it took away from us, and I think for me specifically, and that's why I'm in Israel, is the ability to sit with my DevOps and interact with them. The ability to have that conversation face to face, to read the body language, to understand someone when something is bothering them and be able to address it right away, which is a little bit harder to do sometimes in a Slack channel or a Zoom call, or, and it's uncomfortable because that, hand on the shoulder isn't there.
Right. We have a lot of work to do as humans to make the environment that we're currently in work well. You're absolutely right. If you've got pre-existing relationships with people, it is way easier than if you've got a brand new employee who starts remotely. You've got to really think about the implications behind that, the type of attention that they need to have, the different thought processes that you have to have. They're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to build that spirit of camaraderie through lunches or coffee room or the water cooler. You've got to find unique ways to create an environment where people can communicate virtually. And one of the things that I found that worked really well was the our collaboration tools. Whether you're a Microsoft Teams or WebEx Teams guy or whatever it is, having the ability to have an open room where people could just discuss things. I mean, we have a room called water cooler. We also have other, we have a cybersecurity room and different things like that. But, the water cooler room is where we're posting our memes and our jokes and our funny things. So we still do that stuff. And I think that's important to, continue to develop that relationship within the organization. But yeah, we're definitely in a different world. And I think it's really important for people to put some time into thinking, how do I continue to evolve my organization when I'm only going to see my employees maybe once a month, if that.
Indeed, and once a month for the foreseeable future. I think we're in the midst of a second wave right now. The fall might be a third wave, and the spring might be a fourth wave. I mean, it's unfathomable with what we're dealing with. A lot of people initially compared COVID to the Spanish flu, and there might have been similar tendencies, but it's really not the same because of how evolved we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right, in 1918 you could lock people down in their homes and it was okay. Today, you can't lock us in our homes. We're not the kind of people that want to. No, we want to go out. We want to go. People want to go hiking. They want to go to restaurants, cafes, bars. If you're going through a family situation, I can't tell you how many, how I've tried to advise a lot of my peers is we need to kind of reach out to HR and set up psychological services for people who might be going through something at home, even before COVID happened, but now they're stuck at home with these people, or people who can't see their kids because of COVID and so forth. There's a human toll beyond cyber that I think is oftentimes overlooked when we talk about cyber, but the mental capacity of our employees is as critical as our cyber program is in terms of technology and planning and execution. If they're not focused, we're done.
Yeah, and we're talking about being a CISO and the challenges. And I always used to say in retrospect, if I could do things over, I did a law degree in data privacy, and it would make me more marketable, right? I also think I'd get a degree in psychology so I could understand people better. It's such an important part of the job. When you come into an organization, you're under a microscope, and you've got to establish a lot of relationships with a lot of different people at a lot of different levels really quickly to be a successful CISO. So, you're talking at the executive level, you're talking at the peer level, you're talking at your subordinate levels, and every level has a different story, and it's like a combination to a safe, and you have to figure out what the right combination is as you talk to the people to get them to open up, to get them to understand who you are. And I think that, having that EQ is such an important thing for a CISO. I think it's more important than, obviously it's important to have an IQ, but I think EQ in some cases could override IQ because the people problem is such a big piece of the pie. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I absolutely understand what you mean. And I will tell you this, that there's an how would I want to phrase this properly? And I agree with you with the psychology degree. I disagree with you with the law degree. I think, from my perspective, I think more and more organizations today hire a chief privacy officer to begin with. And I think the whole mix of privacy and security is misleading. I like this division of privacy being one aspect of the business and security being another. I think a CISO's job is complex enough without privacy. Nonetheless, add the whole privacy thing to your table is it's a pain. You can spend months on end just trying to develop a effective privacy policy with your legal
Right.
counsel. That is, you know, because privacy requires so much coordination within the entire enterprise
Mm-hmm.
beyond security. And I have a saying, being CCPA compliant or GDPR compliant doesn't mean you're secure.
Right.
It just means you're giving people a right to their data. It's not really a security law, it's a privacy law. And somewhere in there, someone mixed them both up together. That's like putting pineapple on pizza.
Well, I'm definitely, I agree with you there. I would love not to see privacy in my realm, but in the last 3 roles I've had it. It's the role of CISO is like the role of CIO 20 years ago. The CIO was catching everything because no one really understood what a CIO was. It was a new role. It was developing. The CISO, I think, is the same thing. I mean, it's just now after so many years that we're starting to get board presence. And I think our roles are not defined. I've owned everything from badges to bullets to disaster recovery, business continuity, data privacy, records and information management. I mean, I've owned it all. If it had anything to do with not either access controls or some kind of data that needed to be secured somewhere, I've had to own that, and it makes for a rather interesting organization, I can tell you. But I mean, I agree with you. Privacy is not security. However, I like it. I think it's interesting. I like the fact that society is maturing enough to where it considers, at least for the most part, personal information important. There was a time when it wasn't. There was no such thing as PII and PHI. You had government classified data, which was top secret important, but no one cared about personal data. Now we're evolving and developing.
Well, go ahead, finish your sentence.
Our society to where we actually care about personal data. Look how valuable it is to companies like Facebook and Google. I mean, there wouldn't be a Google if they didn't have our data. Facebook, I think, would be the same way.
So it would be Twitter, Reddit, you name it. LinkedIn. None of these companies would exist without data. They definitely wouldn't be multi-billion-dollar companies without data. It is interesting. I agree with that. It's the concept of privacy within security, and the fact that and I don't really think people care about their privacy. I think people care about the litigation if something happens to their data. We security people, we come from the mindset of, I want to know what's going on with my data. We ask security questions. If I walk downstairs to this street right now in Tel Aviv, and I pulled up, 10 or 15 people, and I asked them, and I may do this once I'm done with quarantine, because I'm still in quarantine in Israel. But once I finish my quarantine, I may go down the street, and I may ask people. I'm gonna grab my camera, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm you know what, I'm gonna do this.
And I'm gonna watch it.
I'm gonna ask them, how much do you care about your personal data?
Right.
And how often, when you sign up for something, do you really read the terms and conditions, or do you understand your rights for privacy? And my guess is, without being prejudiced, and I'll do this unedited, just for the sake of full disclosure, I'm guessing 10% would care.
I don't disagree with you. I think society has, I don't want to say, I guess I do, have become complacent in some ways. We're very willing to give up our information for convenience. We all know that we shouldn't store our credit cards on third party, on Amazon.com or wherever we may be shopping, but we do it anyway. And we store a lot of stuff out there that we know we shouldn't. But we like that convenience. So yeah, I can agree with you to a certain extent that a lot of people will probably give up their privacy for convenience. But there are some people who, do care. And yeah, okay, we are, in some countries, we are very litigious, or, people love to have that ability to sue for, whatever it may be. But yeah, I guess I can see what you're saying. There probably is a good percentage that wouldn't really care. But I think there is not an equal, but I think there is also a percentage that probably does care as well. But even I will admit it. I give up my data for convenience as well. So,
We all do. We all do. You're at an airport and you need Wi-Fi and your phone's about to die and you need to charge it and you can't use it as a hotspot, but you really need to log in and do something. You're going to say, well,
right.
what's it going to hurt this one time? We've all been guilty of it. No one, people always look at me and they go, James, you're a security guy. And when I flew to Israel, I did the ultimate security thing. My face mask is the white anonymous mask. Kind of full thing, and I wore my Data Cartels shirt, um, and on the back it says, hacker be warned, and and people were looking at me all weird. Airport security got a kick out of it because I wore that mask as I'm going through security. They're like, well, you need to take your mask off when you go through TSA, and I'm like, well, we're in a closed, tightly place, like, no one's really keeping 6 feet. It was very interesting to see how people reacted to the fact that I can tell you that people saw what I had on and no one cared.
Right.
Like, so you see a guy who's wearing a hacker mask with a hacker t-shirt on at an airport and you're not saying anything about it. Right, like no one is saying, "Oh, maybe I should probably like turn off my computer now. Maybe I should no."
Right. No.
And you're like, and that's what makes me think that people don't really care about privacy. I personally think, I have a personal opinion about GDPR. It's Europe's failed socialist policies, and now they're trying to make up money for it. And so they created a privacy law that's impossible to impose, and that's really impossible to fight because it's so vague.
Right.
And so that way they can fine companies for whatever money they amount. And just this week, I think what was it? Google lost their 50 million euro fine from France. Like they're really expected to win it.
Right.
I mean, it was known that the French government is in economic hell, and they passed this law in Europe for the sole purpose of fining companies because Ireland in the EU created a 5%. Ireland in the EU created a 5% tax rate for corporations. And so a lot of US companies are based out of Dublin. Google's
Right.
main European headquarters is in Dublin. Facebook, Twitter, they're all there because it's low tax rate, it's English speakers. Well, they speak a form of English. It's Irish English, but nonetheless, it's English. And it passports across all of Europe.
Yeah.
And these jobs don't go to France because all the French people go to Ireland to work in Ireland because the Ireland employment laws are friendlier to companies. While in France, I know I have CISO friends, as I'm sure you do, you can't fire an employee.
Right. Right.
Like it's impossible to fire someone. You hire someone, it's literally worse than a Catholic wedding. No offense to any Catholics. Yeah, it's an indefinite contract.
Yeah.
So I mean, things that we talk about leadership, we talk about the whole idea of building teams. Different countries create different rules to where, as you said early on, and we'll transition out of this here in just a second. You said very early on, I want to hire good human beings and I want to be a good human. And sometimes, we don't always make those calls. Luckily, we live in the greatest country on earth, America, where we have the right to hire and dismiss employees for any purpose, especially if they don't fit our team and they're not productive to our environment. But in other countries, I did projects in the Czech Republic, in France, in Portugal, in Spain, in Poland, in Germany. You can't fire an employee. Firing an employee requires 4 meetings. 4 meetings. Yeah, I mean, literally, it's like trying to pass a bill in Congress. It's and people are advocating for a bad employee. They're like, well, why don't we put him in a new position? And you're like, the guy's late an hour every day to work and you want to give him a different job in the company, just fire him, cut your losses, move on.
Yeah, they have very strong employment laws in Europe. I mean, I've had the benefit of working in multiple countries in Europe, and they're all the same. They're all very employee protective. The contract indefinite in France, the unions, the CNIL in France, the Works Council in Germany, in Austria as well. I mean, it is a workers' union in the European Union. if you get in if you get to one of those positions where you can go forever. So yeah, that's it's different here in America. That's for sure.
Well, I can tell you, even I started my company in 2014, and we were looking for an EU base. We went to the UK. We were looking at the UK or Ireland because there was no way we were going to go to Germany, France, Czech, even though the people that we needed could have been in Germany and France. I would rather hire a German and move him to the UK and give him a 5,000 euro moving bonus than go open an office in Germany.
Right.
And that just, and I don't want this podcast to be about European employment laws. I'll do a whole different podcast on that, and you can hear my view on how Europe the reason that economy in Europe is garbage is because they fail at helping business succeed. Personal opinion. I'm a capitalist, though. So, they look at me and they go, here comes the American guy who wants to eat hamburgers and fries, and his idea of food is McDonald's. And you're like, no, literally no American considers McDonald's foods. We consider it fast food. That's a whole different category of food. Let me explain to you how our categories of food work.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear the different opinions, the stereotypes of Americans in Europe. But, ultimately, I lived in Paris for 5 years. And once you get to know the real Parisians, they all want to go to America, and they would very much like to have some of the American lifestyle as well. So I think there's hope for parts of Europe anyway.
There's hope for all of Europe.
I can say that.
There's hope for all of Europe because I've been to every single country in the EU, and I can tell you, in being in every single country in the EU, there's a lot of hope for Europe. It's not all over yet, but unfortunately, like all things, politics rule, and especially in this time. I mean, we're recording this podcast at a time where people are trying to bring about change, and some of it is social change that's needed. Well, as our country needs a little bit of social change and adjustments, those countries need economic change and adjustments. Right. And it's very hard to bring about change. Everyone knows that. And so
indeed it is.
Kind of transitioning, let me ask you this. As a CISO, what part of security do you spend your most time on, and why?
One of my favorite sayings is, if you don't have executive support, you might as well just not show up for work. So a lot of the time that I spend is meeting with senior leaders throughout the organization to make sure that they're aligned. My partners are the head of audit, the head of legal, the head of HR, the head of compliance, so chief risk officer, the CIO, the senior leadership within the organization has to be on board. If they're not, then you're not going to be successful. They have to understand you. They have to feel that you're bringing value to the organization, and you don't want to talk about security at all. My modus operandi is I'll meet with someone and we'll have lunch and we won't talk security whatsoever. I'll talk to them about what they're doing, how their operations are, what they've got going on, how can I make their life easier. But the first time I meet someone, I don't talk about security at all. I just don't. Usually we talk about travel. We end up talking, oh yeah, I want to go to Italy. Where would you suggest? And I'll rattle off my favorite couple of places, and we'll work that out. But I avoid the first conversation about security because it's just you've got to get the rapport rolling before you can start. I don't want to say bait and switch because it's not, but as again, it's the human element. It's the EQ. You've got to get people feeling comfortable with you. You've got to get them feeling like they can call you have a question. I mean, one of the biggest things, people have a lot of problem with communication with the board. There's umpteen podcasts on any given week about how to communicate with the board, how to provide the board with metrics, how to provide this for the board. The best thing, the single best advice that I can give someone to communicate with the board is get to know them. Go out to lunch with them individually. Understand them as a human, as a person. Help them, educate them. The first time you walk into a boardroom and you've done that, you already own the room. It is so hard to go into a room cold. I mean, it's one thing to give a cybersecurity speech. It's another thing to come into a room and try to convince 12 or 13 people to view your opinion as a subject matter expert, unless you've done your homework in advance. I mean, when I'm at a conference, I'm walking around the conference room, I'm shaking people's hands, I'm talking to them, I'm getting to know who they are. Oh, where are you? Who are you? Who are you CISO with? Or you have to win over part of the room before you even start. And then when you get up and you're doing your spiel, whether you're talking about whatever the latest security technology or data privacy or your HR or whatever, people are going to listen to you. They're going to be more apt to clap or just be part of the conversation or even ask questions. Somebody you approach off the standard path will be much more liable to ask you a question than they would if you would have never talked to them prior. So again, for me, it's all about being human and all about building those relationships. Because if you don't have the relationship, you're not going to be successful. I'll tell you a quick story. I was looking for another job. This is some time ago, and I was interviewing for a CISO role. And I was talking with the chief of staff of the company, and we were going over what expectations were. And she asked me, she said, "So what? How do you come into an organization? What do you do?" And I told her basically the same story. I won't repeat myself for brevity. But I said I talk to senior executives and get them on board. And she says, "Well, as CISO in our company, you won't talk to any senior executives." And I was like, "Well, this conversation is over. There's nothing I can do for you. If I don't have access to the senior executives in your organization, then I can't help you." And that was the end of the conversation. That's how important it is to me.
Yeah, it's I always talk to CISOs about talking to your executive leadership, talking with your colleagues, your bosses, the board, and so forth. You bring a very interesting approach to it, which is one, get to know them on a personal level, which in different organizations that's viewed upon differently, right? Depending on where the CISO ranks within the organization and the organizational chart, we see that be a little different every time.
I don't disagree, but everyone, if anyone has a single question about cybersecurity that they've always wanted to ask and were too afraid to, that's the time to do it. When you have the CISO at lunch, you can ask all those questions and you don't have to ask them in front of your peers and feel like an idiot.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. You can ask those questions that you've always wanted to ask. It's an opportunity to pick the brain of a subject matter expert in a field that is like magic to some people.
So let me ask you this: from a security project perspective, what security project did you enjoy working on the most?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's been so many.
You don't have to pick your ultimate favorite. Pick one that comes to your mind right now.
Yeah, I think the most fun I ever had, I was the CIO of NATO Base Iceland, and we had this thing called the unfunded request. So once a year, before the end of the budget season, you put in a request to get extra money that somebody else didn't spend, and everybody had an equal chance to get it. You built a business case. It's called the UFR, unfunded request, UFR. And you would submit it to the headquarters, and they would read through your request and see if it was worthy of the spare funds that was left in the budget for the year. Well, I did that when I was in Iceland, and I got what I wanted. And it was the first time I put in UFRs for quite a few times. And it was the first time I actually won something, and basically won something. And we built an entire new network infrastructure throughout the whole island. And it was just an incredible project, and we all worked hard. I received a commendation medal from the Navy for the hard work that we did, and we didn't bring in any contractors. We did it just with the staff that was on board, and it was an incredible project, and it goes down in my memory as one of the all-time favorite. But at the same time, probably one of the most disappointing as well, because 6 months later we closed the base. So.
So that work benefited Iceland.
So we spent $20 million, and then we shut it all down. Well, we were paying Iceland $4 billion a year to rent the space. So, and the strategic value of Iceland had been lost after the Cold War had ended in 91, 92. So there was really, we were just there just because. So it didn't make it through one of one of the base closures. But yeah, that was probably the most fun project I ever had. It was just a really good time doing some really cool stuff and getting everything to work the right way. So
When you look at, some of the challenges we experience as security practitioners, what challenges are we starting to overcome? What problems are we really solving now that you say these problems aren't going to come back?
well, I think it starts at the top. I think we're solving the where does CISOs belong question, first of all. We're getting into the boardrooms, we're getting into the executive realms. People are starting to listen to us as a trusted advisor in the organization. I think that's something that's really evolved and matured over the past couple of years. From a technical perspective, things change so much. I don't even want to go there. I mean, I love the way that we constantly evolve our technology, but every other week there's a disruptor, or it seems like every other week there's a disrupting technology.
If you believe every email that comes from every PR agency and every email source, yes. I love those. I love those.
So that's kind of difficult. I would again probably go toward the more human element of the evolution of the CISO as a job field, as as an important part of the organization structure, and being able to help again the different partners within the organization.
What challenges do you see us we still need to work hard on because we're not solving them?
Educating our users. We are humans and we love to click. We are clickers. We cannot stand not clicking. Our fingers on that mouse, man. I think it's somehow built into our DNA or whatever. But we need to work harder to educate our employees, because sometimes they are the first, last, and only line of defense against the worst bad guys out there. I mean, they really are.
Yes,
if
they
you
are.
look at the past 18 months, most of the hacks have been one of two things. Either an employee got phished and they either gave up their credentials, or they clicked on some attachment and got malware on their machine and the bad guys got in that way, or the bad guys found some unpatched system that should have been patched many, many years ago. So, for me, we have a really robust, well, I've always had in every organization, I've believed in information security awareness training, and making sure that our users understand that they are that last layer of protection. And not only that, but one of the tools that I've always liked to use is the connection to home. And what I mean by that is, it's one thing you go to work for 8 hours a day or however many hours you go, and you have the corporate responsibility for those 8 hours to protect the corporate data. Well, when the same principle applies to your home data, it's very easy for it to become a 24-hour thing, not just an 8-hour thing. So whether you're protecting your 1040 return or your child's social security numbers, or your banking information or whatever it may be, I always try to correlate work and home together, so I get that bang for the buck. It's always in the user's mind, and I think we could definitely use more awareness, get people more up to speed on how the bad guys are doing what they're doing, and what the users can do to do their part.
So early on in the podcast, you spoke about reaching out to colleagues in Iceland or France or Spain, Portugal, England, wherever, for help in terms of a security community, and we do that really, really well. I think as a community, it's easy for us to reach out to each other and ask each other and consult and really talk about it. What are some of your best practices in terms of security? What are like the 3 things that you say these are the bedrock for my successful program?
Oh, well, I mean, right away, user awareness and patching. I mean, if we're not talking strategically, we'll start at the bottom. Let's make our house, right. Our foundation of our house is a good technical program. You've got your patching, you've got your user awareness and things like that. And as you go up the stack, eventually you have governance as a roof over your house. And your pillars are probably like, privileged access management or identity access management, the access controls. And then throughout that house, you have your different layers. Defense in depth is kind of an old saying, but it's still, I think, a very valid saying. Some would disagree, but, I believe in layering, having security in layers. So, I think those are probably all really valid pieces of the puzzle. But if you were going to tell me I only had enough money to do one thing, it would probably be train my users. Two things would be train my users and patch my systems, or maybe I'd flip flop depending upon
and the third thing.
Tough, really tough. I want to go strategic again. I want to talk about getting buy-in from all levels of the organization, because it's just so important. You get the buy-in from your users, you get the buy-in from your team, you get the buy-in from your peers and your executive teams and things like that. I mean, I can't speak to that enough, how important it is. If you don't have that, you're not going to last long in an organization.
No, you're not.
You can't fool yourself. If you're not talking to the CIO on a daily or a couple times a week, and if you're not presenting to the board, and if you're not meeting with the heads of HR and compliance and legal, something's up. It's either it's a really different organization. So there's always no two organizations are created the same, but it's either a really different organization or you've got some work to do. You do, because it is just so important.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because so often, when I ask the question as to best practices, we talk a little bit about, program development. We talk about different things that could have an impact on it and whatnot. But there's a real thing to talk about patching your systems. I do a daily practitioner brief, and I do it Monday through Thursday. And the main priority of it is, let's try and organize everything that needs to be patched in an enterprise or small business system in one place and send it out to everyone, because that's what I do every day. I mean, I begin my day by looking at what alerts are out there, and then what systems are in any of my infrastructures, and what needs to get patched. That's how I start my day. So I resonate with your number one or two as you flip flop them between both. Because to me, it's the same thing as if you just do the basic blocking and tackling right, you're able to do so much more thereafter.
Right. And in the partnership part gets you the money to do those things, and more money. Maybe you need more people. Hey, if you've got buy-in, you're going to get more people. Maybe you need a new tool. If you have buy-in, you're going to be able to get that new tool budgeted. It all holistically fits together in a tight little package that, you've got to have each one of those pieces of the puzzle in order to create that environment of success.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So now we're going to move to my favorite part of the podcast, I think. It's our CISO Insight Round. So here's the deal. Here's what we're going to be doing, Nikk. I'm going to be asking you 6 questions. It's kind of like a fire round, right?
Right.
A lightning round. Let's call it a lightning round. All right. Let's see how well you do. One buzzword you'd want to get rid of forever. I have a graveyard back in Atlanta, and it's got a bunch of buzzwords buried in it. Which tombstone would you put? Which buzzword would you put on a tombstone?
Cloud.
Okay. Why? I that's the first cloud. I don't think we've heard cloud yet.
Everything is cloud. Everything's in the cloud. What is the cloud? It sounds like it's this massive, gigantic thing that, it's some mysterious force. It's not. I mean, cloud was around 20, 30, maybe 40, 50 years ago. It's nothing. It's not a new buzzword. It's just a over regurgitated word that needs to be put away.
One technology that I think is going to change cybersecurity forever.
Okay, you went digitized on me for a second. What was the question?
So one technology that will change the way we do cybersecurity.
One technology that will change the way we do cybersecurity. Something that will enable us to control our users better.
Human behavior analytics.
Yep. We need to correct the HID. The human interface device.
So I will tell, I had Justin Berman, who's the head of security at Dropbox. And we had a very interesting conversation around the idea of, educating people to use technology or building better technology that interacts better with people. And I can't
Mm-hmm.
tell you how much hate mail we got.
Oh, okay. We'll stop there then.
No, that's great. It's controversial because people say,
Uh,
well, it's stupid. You really got to work on the humans. And we're like, why? Right? Like, you've built cars and cars still have accidents. So now what are we doing? We're taking the human element away from cars by having computers drive cars. Because guess what? They have less accidents.
right. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
The
I'm not
last
going to
book.
bite on that one.
Question number 3 in our CISO Insight round. The last book you read, or your book you're reading right now.
Oh. I don't know if I can say that. Um,
Why not?
it's called the no asshole rule.
You can. You absolutely can. The no asshole rule works. Love it. The last movie you saw.
The Ritual.
What's that about?
It's about these guys that experience a loss with their friends, and they go to hike in Sweden to kind of reflect on his death and everything. And in the end, it turns out to be a horror movie, and almost all of them are killed by this supernatural creature.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If anyone thought to go see the movie, you now know the ending.
Oh, it's an old movie. It's from a few years ago, so it's not in the theaters.
What's your favorite music?
Oh, that depends upon what I'm doing. You know, if I'm driving, I like Joe Satriani. If I'm sitting in the office, I like a mix of whatever's playing on Spotify or what have you. So, you know, if I'm at dinner, you know, who knows? You know, whatever I could like whatever's playing at the restaurant. I don't particularly have a certain genre that I stick to. Although I do like classical music played in churches in Gothic cathedrals in Germany. I think those are really, you know, really cool to watch concerts like that over in Europe, and that's something I would go out of my way for.
I was in Italy in a small village, and we were there over a weekend. And I woke up on a Sunday morning, and I could hear the echoes of just the choir of the church. And as a Jew, it intrigued me. And so I walked over to the church, and I'm standing outside, and it was just unbelievable to hear it. It was intoxicating. I recorded some of it on my phone, and it was my ringtone for like a good while,
Oh,
because it was. I mean, I don't know if it was the acoustics of the place or
right.
the ladies and the men singing, but it was. Um, every hair on my body stood. I
I
couldn't
was
understand the words.
I was in a I saw a Wagner concert in Neuschwanstein in Germany, and that to this day is probably still the best concert, you know, I've ever been to, just from the acoustic resonation of that castle.
Yeah. And our final question for this round is the one thing you took away from the COVID-19 crisis.
That remote workforce does work, and it's efficient, and you can still have a good time and keep your team together. So lots of things.
That's awesome. Well, Nikk, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really do appreciate it. I know our fans do appreciate it. You guys can connect with Nikk on LinkedIn. We'll have his details below. Please don't spam him. For the life of all things that are good, he won't accept you. Just be nice, folks. Just be nice. Be a human. If you listen to this podcast,
Be a good human. Yeah.
yeah, be a good human. Um, as for us, this is our CISO Talk from the road. We've got a lot more great episodes with a lot more great CISOs coming up over the next few weeks as I am traveling in Israel, and we'll be meeting with some local CISOs here, and very excited to bring you some international voices so that everyone can actually hear and listen. And I've got some tours scheduled once I finish here. I'm going to go visit some CISOs and see some fusion centers and security operation centers, and it'll be very, very cool. Can't wait to bring you that content over the next few weeks. But folks, Nikk Gilbert, who is just amazing, 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 amazing. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe, comment below, ask your questions, submit them, cyberhubpodcast.com for all the information you need on your favorite podcast listening platform or on our YouTube channel. We're just a few users away from being able to monetize their YouTube channel. So we're forever grateful for all your subscribers. Thank you so much. And until next week, folks, this is James Azar letting you all to please, please, please stay cyber safe.